Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Worldwide Battle Royale. We saw a lot of things happen in the last episode, including a bunch of alliance forming in Africa, as well as a major war that saw Germany get defeated. So, if you haven't seen the last two episodes, I would suggest you go watch them, but with that, let's get right into it. And the first thing that's going to happen in this episode is Cambodia is going to be invaded by their three neighbors because they're all allied to each other, and Cambodia has been stubbornly refusing to join an alliance. They wanted to stay neutral, and these guys were like, no, you're not staying neutral. We want to invade into you. And India didn't stop them. India claims to have nothing to do with this, but they kind of just let their allies do this, and yeah. And just like that, Cambodia has been erased from the map. With this, a lot of neutral nations that are near the Cyan Alliance, specifically Pakistan, is going to join China because they just don't like that India let that happen. And Turkmenistan is also going to join China's alliance. In other news, Turkey, having been unable to secure their alliance a victory in the last video and being forced to withdraw, wants to reprove their power on the world stage, and so they first do it by invading Cyprus. And then, while they're occupying Cyprus, before they've started the work of annexing them, they start to send armies into Syria. And while they're doing that, Israel also sends their own armies into Syria. And Syria starts calling out for help from the international order. And they will get it in the form of Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, who all don't like that these powers are expansionist. Palestine will stay silent in this. So Syria will be able to push back Israel to the border, but not any further. And we'll start pushing back Turkey. Iraq will start attacking Turkey over here. Iran has not actually done anything yet in this series. And they will continue on that trend of not doing anything because first, Turkey is getting invaded. And their plans are once again going badly. But Israel is doing pretty well against Jordan because they've switched from Syria to Jordan. Their north is starting to get invaded, but things are not going well for Jordan as they've basically just lost entirely and they decided to surrender. But as part of their surrender, they have to allow Israel access through their country. That was one of the things that was agreed to. So now Iraq can start properly getting invaded. And so they withdraw their troops from Turkey, which allows Turkey to start invading into Syria and Iraq. And Iraq manages to push back Israel to the border with Jordan, pretty much. And now it's like a stalemate for a while. Turkey goes through with finally annexing Cyprus. And then finally, all the countries, after a few more months, agree to a peace treaty. And the peace treaty is actually relatively late because it was a pretty stalemated war. So Turkey takes some land from Syria, and Israel annexes all of Jordan, since they kind of were able to do that. And because I don't want to have to deal with this anymore, Israel and Palestine just decide to unite into a country, and there's no problems with that, and no one will ever think anything about that ever again. And this country is now called, and after they do that, they decide to invade Lebanon, and they do it successfully, and this way they can change their name to Levant, and Levant will make an alliance with Turkey. Meanwhile, in Europe, with no one to really stop them, Russia commands Poland to invade into Czechia, and Poland obediently agrees, since they want the land, and Poland is way stronger than Czechia on their own. So this might take a little while, but Czechia is not receiving that much aid, so Poland will annex all of Czechia. They then pressure Austria into joining in on Russia's alliance as well, and Russia is starting to look more and more like a hegemonic power over Europe. Out of fear of a Russian invasion, Germany will actually join the French alliance, which is funny because they just got invaded by them. And in exchange for joining, the French actually give them back their puppet state that they took over Germany. And now let's go into Africa, where a massive war is going to break out. But first, a few more things are going to happen. South Sudan will start being invaded by Ethiopia, and it goes pretty well for them because South Sudan is like a wreck, and Ethiopia is really strong right now. But all of a sudden, regular Sudan and the CAR start sending their own troops into South Sudan, allegedly to liberate the people from Ethiopia, but actually just because they're afraid of what would happen otherwise. And eventually it's like this. But then fighting starts to break out in South Sudan between the two sides, and they don't declare war on each other, and the fighting is exclusively in South Sudan. But it is going on. While that's going on, Malawi gets attacked by Malawi gets attacked by Mozambique, which makes the entire Pink Alliance mad at Mozambique, and Mozambique is expelled from the alliance because they're not supposed to expand, and they, of course, then join the other alliance. So that might have been a pretty bad idea if you think about it. And then Tanzania basically says, hey, I want to join an alliance because I'm kind of scared of everyone. And which alliance should I join? And obviously everyone's like, you should join our alliance. And after some intense negotiations, Tanzania ends up joining the Pink Alliance, which then causes Uganda to do the same. And this is where the war is going to start to break out, because when Uganda joins the Pink Alliance, they immediately start sending troops into South Sudan. And now Ethiopia is starting to really lose the war in South Sudan, and they don't want to lose the war. And also, they've claimed some of this territory as their own sovereign territory, so they think they're being invaded, and they basically declare war on Sudan without anyone else's approval. And Sudan is weak enough that this is not going to go well for Sudan, but also now there's a massive war in Africa because the entire Pink Alliance declares war on Nigeria's alliance, and Nigeria's alliance declares war on the Pink Alliance. And so things are about to get ugly. The first thing that happens is Sierra Leone falls. They never really stood a chance. Liberia also starts getting invaded. Nigeria will start sending their troops in to try and deal with the Congo, and for now it's doing pretty well. Their Congo is pretty much gone. Sudan is not really able to deal with Ethiopia's invasion, let alone everything else that's going on. But the place where the Pink Alliance is doing well is in the southern front, where they're able to liberate Malawi and start invading into Mozambique, which was just not ready for this. And in fact, they just kind of fall, and South Africa needs to prop them up. Unfortunately for South Africa, they're also getting invaded. And although they're strong, they're not really strong enough to beat Tanzania, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia combined. And once Mozambique falls, South Africa is really panicking. So they will keep going. They'll even start an invasion into Namibia. But then Angola will join the war on the side of the Pink Alliance because they have bad relations they've, since the relations reset, gotten bad relations with South Africa. And this will kind of doom. So first of all, they lose their exclave pretty much immediately, but they didn't care about that because South Africa is now kind of doomed. They're still managing to hold out, but it's only a matter of time. Meanwhile, in the Western Front, Cote d'Ivoire is holding out decently, but they're only barely connected to Mali and Mauritania just lost its coastline to Senegal. And then all of a sudden, something amazing happens. Ethiopia had been in some secret talks with basically all of the world's great powers to try and see if anyone would be willing to help them. And they actually managed to get a pretty powerful country in the world to help them, and that is Saudi Arabia. And when Saudi Arabia joins the war, it pretty much ends the Sudanese section of the war pretty quickly. Sudan pretty much falls, and in fact they just surrender, and as part of the surrender, they get fully occupied. Then South Sudan will also start to fall, and the Pink Alliance is panicking, but Rwanda has been doing some expert diplomacy on the part of the Pink Alliance as well. They've been the diplomat in the Pink Alliance, and they have managed to get an even bigger great power backer to help them. So big that their entire alliance is about to change colors, or actually that Powers Alliance is going to change colors because I'm lazy. And that is Turkey. So immediately after this happens, the Levant begins invading into Saudi Arabia. This distracts Saudi Arabia because they're roughly equal in power, I would say, the Levant and Saudi Arabia. So they're going to be kind of stalemated along this line. Meanwhile, Sudan basically unsurrenders, or is, I guess, propped back up by their allies, who start getting invaded into, as Turkey starts sending support to the Pink Alliance. But it might just be a little bit too little too late, because the Nigerian alliance is just winning in a lot of fronts. So first of all, they managed to cut off Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire from Mali and Mauritania. And with help from their Nigerian puppet state, they start just absolutely using specialized desert troops to just take the desert portions of Mali, where they were storing a decent amount of their military resources, as well as the deserted portions of Mauritania. And then another thing is sent out from Senegal to meet up with these troops to cut off Mali and Mauritania from each other, and then Mali is completely overrun. Meanwhile, Liberia is also taken, and Cote d'Ivoire decides to surrender rather than keep fighting. Turkey's aid is somewhat helping as Sudan continues to get pushed back, and Saudi Arabia is getting pushed into finally, and Ethiopia realizes they're not invincible. Meanwhile, South Africa is still struggling, but they're managing to hold off for a little while at least. But at the same time as that's happening, Mauritania finally gets overrun, which means that the Western Front can now focus their entire energy on the Eastern Front, overrunning Congo and attacking the CAR in Chad, which means that Turkey's aid is not going to help anymore as Sudan gets overrun again, and South Sudan as well. And South Sudan is basically just completely destroyed at this point as Kenya starts getting invaded, although they have started redirecting their forces up north, which has also allowed for South Africa to start bouncing back a bit. Meanwhile, Chad is getting fully invaded and decides to surrender, which means the CAR is kind of cooked, and now it's looking very, very bad for the Pink Alliance. The only place the Pink Alliance is winning is that Turkey has decided to just start sending all of their aid to the Levant, and Saudi Arabia is starting to really just lose really badly. And if that weren't bad enough, Oman decides to join in on the Pink Alliance and start invading Saudi Arabia. So this front is just not going well for Saudi Arabia, and no one really wants to join them. Meanwhile, over here, the DRC is asked politely to join the Nigerian alliance. They say no, and so then they end up being invaded by the Nigerian alliance because they think it'll be easier to invade them in order to access the stronger countries in the Pink Alliance more quickly, to end the war more quickly. They managed to fully overrun Uganda and start invading into the northern parts of Rwanda, as well as starting to overrun Kenya. South Africa has decided to just put all of their troops into South Africa for a little bit, and South Africa is pretty much dealt with, which is nice, except for the fact that pretty much all of Rwanda, as well as Kenya, the northern parts of Tanzania, and half of the DRC are also dealt with. So maybe that wasn't a good idea, although now it's not a two-front war anymore. Both sides are looking at Zambia and really trying to get them to join, but Zambia stays neutral as the front marches ever more slowly downwards. The Tanzanian side is actually doing a little bit more successful, or is actually being a little more successful than the DRC side, just because there's fewer troops over here. But a breath of fresh air might be coming because the UAE has just joined the war on Saudi Arabia, and they're pretty strong, and Saudi Arabia is starting to collapse. Of course, most of this is desert, but the Saudi Arabian coast has been taken, which is really bad because now they definitely can't supply their allies. And seeing the way that this war is going, Yemen will also join in on this war. So now it's just like everyone wants to get a piece of Saudi Arabia, and Iraq doesn't want to be left out, so they also join in. And Saudi Arabia is getting invaded on all sides. They're defending Riyadh until the very end, but eventually they won't be able to do anything as it gets taken. And that will provide the last bit of hope for the pink team as they start getting aid from their allies, which turns the absolutely crumbling front line into more of a stalemate. And the war is just dragging on now. So while the war is dragging on, a bunch of countries in the Orange Alliance decide they're just going to start taking land from the countries that surrender to them. And so this is what the northern part of the war looks like after that. You can see a lot of puppet states were made, a lot of land got taken, and overall, Nigeria's alliance already made themselves a ridiculous amount stronger. But aid is starting to flow in from the coalition that just divided up Saudi Arabia, and they are landing on the Ethiopian coast. And they land in Djibouti, and Ethiopia was not prepared for this because while they're strong, they're not as strong as the coalition of countries over here. And they pretty much start losing very quickly. Turns out getting Saudi Arabia to join them was not a good idea. And so Ethiopia also decides to withdraw from the eastern front of this war, or from their southern front, which allows for a massive regaining back over here, allowing them to retake this lake and start just invading back, and now Nigeria is kind of covering for this whole front. Ethiopia does manage to push these guys back a little bit, even splitting them into two, but doesn't actually manage to push them off of the African continent. And the DRC is pushing back. But one last thing is going to happen that's going to change the course of this war. Actually, a few things are going to happen. So first of all, Syria decides to join the war on the side of Nigeria's alliance for some reason. They immediately get invaded. But it did serve as a distraction. Then Egypt decides to join the war on the side of Nigeria's alliance. And that starts helping with these guys as well as invading into the Levant. The Levant starts pushing back, obviously, and into Egypt, but this entire invasion was kind of futile once Egypt joined the war, and Yemen even gets landed in. And these guys are starting to fall back, and just in case you thought that the Pink Alliance had any chances of winning, Russia then launches an invasion into Turkey through Georgia and Azerbaijan, and it goes pretty well because Russia's really strong, and Turkey is losing land really quickly. They decide to withdraw from Syria, which leaves this awkward little thing of Syrian troops here that has to be reinvaded by their allies, who are trying to help Turkey out, and kind of the northern branch of the Pink Alliance kind of refocuses on Turkey and helping Turkey out, so they managed to kick these guys out, and then they make a truce with Egypt and kind of split off into their own alliance. But I'm going to keep them pink because it's just nicer. But with this, Ethiopia manages to make a massive push into the south, and with their last hope pretty much gone, things are looking very bad. Zambia is forced to join the Orange Alliance because they saw what happened to the DRC when they didn't join, which just makes things even worse. And at this point, Namibia and Botswana, as well as Angola and Zimbabwe, realize that there's no point, and they all agree to surrender. So that kind of stops the southern front of the war. You might think the northern front of the war would keep going on, but with all these countries versus Russia, they've actually managed to stalemate it. And these guys have already made a truce with these guys, so they're not really mad at each other anymore. And in fact, Nigeria's alliance is willing to help out the Pink Alliance against Russia because they think Russia's a bigger threat. And so Russia is only going to end up taking a little bit of land. So let's see what everything looks like after this. Okay, so these are the new borders of the Middle East. And these are the new borders of Africa. And the African part of the Pink Alliance is forced to dissolve. So, yeah, Nigeria's alliance just became pretty much hegemonic, at least over Africa. Let's do one more thing before we end this video. Portugal will join Brazil's alliance, which adds another tension point in the Iberian Peninsula between the Brazilian and American alliances. Morocco will join the American alliance. Nigeria's alliance condemns this because they don't like that American alliances are encroaching. India's alliance will start looking abroad for more people to join them, and Iran will be one of the countries they get to join, so it's no longer neutral. France's alliance will go to the former countries that were part of the Pink Alliance in Africa and promise protection, and pretty much all of them will accept, except for, strangely, Zimbabwe and Liberia will not accept. And you can see, like, alliances are starting to expand. Chile finally agrees to join Brazil's alliance after long negotiations. Argentina still holds out. They think that they're too powerful to be in an alliance with an even more powerful country. And now everyone's looking towards Australia because they have announced that they want to join an alliance. And after weighing everyone's offers, they agreed to join the Chinese alliance. And that is where we will end this episode. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.